That's no longer our concern.
The last thing my mother said to me before she turned the porch light off was not goodbye. It wasn't "I love you" or "I'm sorry" or even "come back when this is over." It was 7 words, delivered the way you read a utility bill, flat, final, already forgotten before they finished leaving her mouth. That's no longer our concern. Then the door closed. Then the light clicked off. And I stood in the October dark, 16 years old, 2 months pregnant, holding a plastic grocery bag with everything I owned inside it. 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, a toothbrush, and $40 in babysitting money I'd been hiding in a textbook like it was something precious. It was all I had. The cold came through my jacket fast. Down the street a dog was barking at nothing. The pot roast my mother had made for dinner. We had eaten it together, the 3 of us, forks against plates. One last performance of a family that had already made its decision. The smell of it was still in my hair. I remember thinking that was the strangest thing, that I could still smell her cooking while she was on the other side of a locked door, deciding I no longer existed. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was too deep inside the shock of it. The specific numbness that comes when something happens that your body refuses to process as real. I just stood there and understood. Completely. Permanently. In the way you understand things that rewire you at the cellular level. I was alone. 20 years later, I walked into the Clayton County Courthouse through the front entrance. Not the side door I usually used, the one reserved for judges, the one with my name on the placard beside it. Today I was not presiding. Today I was the defendant. My own parents had filed suit against me, and the irony of sitting on the wrong side of a courtroom I had spent 2 years building a reputation inside was not lost on me. Neither was this. The attorney they hired was someone I knew. Not personally. Not yet. But I had been watching his career for 7 years with the specific attention of a woman who keeps track of what matters. I had watched him make partner. I had watched him take the cases that built reputations. I had watched him become exactly the weapon my parents would reach for when they smelled money. I had also, 7 years ago, made a single quiet decision that neither he nor my parents knew about. A decision that was about to detonate in the middle of that courtroom like something I had planted in the dark and watered with patience for years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Press 2 fingers to the inside of your left wrist. Find a pulse. Count. 1, 2, 3. I learned that trick on a labor table at 16 with no one holding my hand. When everything is out of your control, you find the one thing that isn't. I found my heartbeat. I've been counting it in courtrooms and hospital hallways and parking lots and bathroom floors ever since. It means I'm still here. Whatever just happened, I'm still here. I pressed my fingers to my wrist and looked at my parents across the courtroom. Raymond Booker, my father, a black man who had climbed out of poverty through the military and spent the rest of his life wearing his respectability like it was the only thing standing between him and everything he'd escaped. His posture had softened with age. Not much, just enough to see what 20 years of a bad decision costs a body. Lydia Booker, my mother, a white woman from a Connecticut family that had never fully forgiven her for marrying him. She had built her entire identity around being the respectable one, the one who sacrificed, who rose above, who maintained the picture-perfect life at any cost. Her hair had gone silver. She wore it the same way she always had. Neat. Controlled. The hair of a woman who needs you to know she has never been careless. They were whispering together, confident, certain. They thought they had finally trapped me. They thought the law would crush me. They thought they were about to walk out of that courthouse with everything my grandmother had left behind. The inheritance she had spent 20 years of coupon clipping and roof patching and sweet potato pie selling to build for me. They didn't know about the robe hanging in my chambers down the hall. They didn't know what I had quietly done 7 years ago. And they had no idea, not the faintest shadow of an idea, what was about to happen when their own attorney looked up from his papers, saw me sitting at the defendant's table, and walked right past them without a word. He stopped in front of me, bowed his head slightly, and said, in a voice the entire courtroom heard. "Good morning, Judge." My mother's face went white. My father's mouth opened. And in that suspended, breathless moment, in that specific silence that falls when something inevitable finally arrives, I felt the 20 years collapse into a single point. The girl on the porch, the woman in the robe, everything that happened between them. This is that story. If something in those words just cracked something open in you, stay. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about a courtroom or an inheritance or parents who made a choice they spent 20 years paying for. It's about what a girl builds when she has nothing. What she becomes when the people who were supposed to love her decide she's a problem to solve. And what happens when she finally stops surviving and starts collecting. You didn't find this story by accident. Stay with me. There are things growing inside you that you don't know about yet. I don't mean that as a warning. I mean it as the truest thing I know. At 16, standing on that dark porch with a plastic bag, I had no idea what was already building inside me. Not just the baby I was terrified of. Not just the love I didn't yet know how to give. Something else. Something that would spend the next 20 years trying to kill me from the inside out. And something quieter than that. More patient. More precise. Something that had already, without my knowing it, begun to build the courtroom moment you just witnessed. But first, there was a porch. And a dark road. And 40 minutes on a bus that smelled like diesel and old upholstery. And at the end of that road, a porch light that was still on. The bus dropped me at the end of Grandma's Road at midnight. I walked the last quarter mile in the dark, gravel crunching under my shoes, the plastic bag bumping against my leg with every step. The houses out here were spread wide apart, each one sitting on its own piece of land like it needed room to breathe. No streetlights, just the moon and whatever came through the trees. I almost didn't knock. I stood on her porch for a full minute, maybe longer, with my fist raised and my nerve dissolving. She was 71 years old. She went to bed at 9. She hadn't asked for a pregnant granddaughter showing up at her door in the middle of the night with a plastic bag and nowhere else to go. I knocked anyway, because I had nowhere else to go. The light came on. Footsteps. Then the door opened, and there she was, Josephine, in her old flannel robe, her gray hair loose around her face, squinting against the dark. She looked at me for half a second. Just half a second. Then something moved through her eyes. Not surprise, not judgment, not the particular exhaustion of a woman being asked for too much. Something older than all of that. Recognition. The look of someone who has been waiting for a knock they always knew was coming. She stepped aside. "Come in, baby," she said. "Come in." No questions. No lecture. No sharp intake of breath at the sight of my stomach or the bag in my hand or the fact that it was midnight and I was 16 and clearly had nowhere else on earth to be. Just, "Come in." I crossed her threshold and something in my chest broke open. Not cleanly, not dramatically, but in the slow, specific way of something that has been held too tight for too long. I made it 3 steps into her hallway before my legs stopped working. She caught me before I hit the floor, held me while I sobbed into her flannel robe, ugly and heaving and completely falling apart. She didn't say anything. She just held on. When I finally stopped shaking, she walked me to the guest room. Clean sheets, a little lamp on the nightstand, a quilt stitched by hand that smelled like cedar, and something I would later understand was simply her. She sat at the edge of the bed and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was rough and warm and felt like the most solid thing I had touched in weeks. "You're not alone," she said. "Not as long as I'm breathing." I believed her. For the first time since I'd seen that pink line on a test I'd taken alone in a gas station bathroom, I believed someone. The months that followed were hard in ways I didn't have language for yet, and holy in ways I still don't. Grandma drove me to every doctor's appointment in her rusted Chevy pickup, blue paint peeling from the hood in long strips, the passenger seat held together with a strip of duct tape she'd applied sometime in the mid-90s and never replaced. She cooked me oatmeal every morning, even when I swore I wasn't hungry. She told me I was strong before I had any evidence to support it. She didn't have much money. What she had, she spent. Maternity clothes from the church sale. Prenatal vitamins she drove 40 minutes to find on discount. A second-hand crib she spent 3 evenings assembling herself because she didn't want to ask anyone for help until she understood exactly how the pieces fit together. She clipped coupons like it was a second job. She saved every dollar from her vegetable stand. A folding table at the edge of the property where she sold tomatoes and butter beans and sweet potatoes in brown paper bags, talking to every customer like they were the most interesting person she'd encountered all week. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after I arrived, a man in a suit drove up the gravel road in a car that was too clean for Creekwood. He had a brochure and a number and a smile that had been practiced in a mirror. He wanted to buy the back acres. 15 wooded acres behind the house that sloped down toward the creek. Development company. Above market rate. He said it like he was doing her a favor. Grandma rocked in her porch chair and listened to all of it. That land isn't for selling, she said pleasantly. He pressed. He had a gift for pressing, the kind of man who mistakes persistence for persuasion. She smiled and didn't move a single inch. After he left, I asked her why. She looked at me with eyes that held something I wasn't old enough yet to read. Some things are for saving, she said. When the time is right, that land will speak for itself. I didn't understand. I filed it away anyway. A puzzle piece with no picture yet, the first of many she would give me over the years. My son was born on a rainy Wednesday in March. Grandma practically sprinted through the hospital entrance, waving her purse at nurses, demanding to know why everyone was walking so slowly when there was a baby coming. She held my hand through the hard parts and prayed quietly through the harder ones, and when they finally placed him in my arms, warm and small and smelling like something I had no words for, she burst into tears before I did. I named him Tobias, because it means God is good, and I needed to believe, in that moment, that something was. Grandma held him next. Her weathered hands looked enormous around his tiny body. She looked down at him with an expression I have spent the rest of my life trying to describe and never quite managed. You did it, baby, she whispered. You're a mother now. She looked up at me. And you're going to be a good one. I already know. That night, alone in my hospital room with Tobias sleeping on my chest, his breath warm against my collarbone, I made a vow. I would build a life. I would build a future. I would make sure that no one, not my parents, not the world, not the disease I didn't yet know was already moving through my body like a slow fire, could ever make me feel that small again. I didn't know how hard that vow would be to keep. I didn't know what the next few years would ask of me, but I knew one thing with a certainty that felt almost physical. The girl who had walked up that gravel road with a plastic bag and $40 was not the same person who had walked back down it. Something had changed. Something had begun. And whatever tried to stop it was going to have to come through me first. There's a woman I know, someone who watched me build this from nothing, who told me I was chasing something I'd never catch. That stories like this don't find audiences. That nobody wants to feel this much anymore. I think about her every time someone stays. Every time someone makes it past the hard part and keeps going. If you're still here, if Josephine's hands and that rainy Wednesday and a baby named Tobias means something to you, subscribe. Prove her wrong with me, because I'm just getting started. The doctor's office smelled like floor wax and recycled air and the particular silence of rooms where people receive news that divides their lives into before and after. I sat in a plastic chair across from a man in a white coat who had kind eyes and the practiced stillness of someone who delivered difficult things regularly and had learned that stillness was a form of mercy. Tobias was 18 months old. I was 19. I was 2 semesters into community college, working the early shift at the Piggly Wiggly and the late shift cleaning offices downtown, carrying my son in a sling while I vacuumed, because childcare cost money I didn't have and Grandma's knees were getting worse, and I refused to ask anyone for anything I hadn't earned. I had been feeling wrong for months. Not tired wrong, not working too hard wrong, wrong in a way that lived inside my bones. Joint pain that arrived without warning and left the same way. A rash across both cheeks I had blamed on cheap soap and Georgia heat. Fevers that spiked in the night and were gone by morning like they had somewhere else to be. Mornings when I woke up and my hands wouldn't close properly, stiff and hot and foreign, like they belonged to someone older and more broken than me. Grandma had noticed. Of course she had. "Baby, something's not right," she said one evening, watching me struggle to open a jar. "I'm fine. You keep saying that." "Because I keep being fine." She gave me the look she reserved for statements she found both incorrect and unworthy of argument. 3 days later, she drove me to the county clinic herself, wouldn't hear a word against it, sat in the waiting room with Tobias on her lap, and a hymn humming low in her throat while I gave blood I didn't know would change everything. The results took 3 days. The doctor called me back on a Tuesday afternoon. Grandma offered to come. I told her I was fine. I sat across from him alone. "Ms. Booker," he said, "your results show a pattern we need to discuss. You have systemic lupus erythematosus." I had never heard those words arranged that way. "What is that?" He folded his hands. "It's an autoimmune disease. Your immune system is attacking your own body, your joints, your skin, potentially your organs. There's no cure." The floor tilted slightly. "No cure. We can manage it. Medication, lifestyle adjustments. You'll have periods of remission and periods of flare. Good days and very hard days." He paused. "But Ms. Booker, you need to reduce stress. Rest. Take care of yourself." I almost laughed out loud. I was a 19-year-old single mother working 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. Stress was not a variable I could reduce. Stress was the entire structure. "What happens if I don't?" I asked. "If I can't slow down?" He didn't look away. I respected him for that. "Lupus can attack your kidneys, your heart, your central nervous system. If you push your body past its limits consistently and for long enough," he stopped. "Started again. Your body will begin to shut down." I sat with that for a moment. The fluorescent light above us buzzed once and steadied. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay. Okay. Thank you for telling me." I stood up, shook his hand, walked out through the waiting room with its plastic chairs and its outdated magazines and its smell of floor wax and recycled air. I sat in Grandma's car in the parking lot for 23 minutes. I know it was 23 because I counted them. One hand on the steering wheel, the other pressed to my left wrist. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The thing about a diagnosis like that, the thing nobody tells you, is that it doesn't feel like receiving information. It feels like being handed a weight you will carry for the rest of your life and being told to keep walking like nothing is different. Like the weight isn't there. Like your arms aren't already shaking. I thought about Tobias, 18 months old, already pulling himself up on furniture, already looking at the world with those wide, serious eyes that made something in my chest ache with a love I still didn't have adequate language for. I thought about my parents. I thought about what they would say if they knew. The way my mother's lips would press together. The way my father's shoulders would shift. That military adjustment that meant he was filing something away under consequence and inevitability. And what did you expect? I thought, they do not get to be right about me. I wiped my face, started the car, drove home, walked inside, picked up my son, and pressed my face into the warm curve of his neck and breathed him in and did not tell a single person what I had learned. Not Grandma. Not anyone. Not yet. Because here is what I understood. Sitting in that parking lot with a disease I couldn't cure and a baby I would not fail in a life that had just gotten considerably harder. Knowing something and saying it out loud are 2 different things. Once you say it, it becomes real in a new way. It takes up more space. It invites other people's fear into the room, and suddenly you're managing their feelings about your body on top of everything else you're already carrying. I was not ready for that. I was also not ready to stop. So I made a decision in that parking lot that I would make again and again over the next 20 years in various forms. In law school hallways and courthouse bathrooms and hospital waiting rooms and the parking lot of my own chambers on mornings when the pain was bad enough to blur my vision. I would carry this, quietly, alone, without asking anyone to put down what they were holding to help me hold what I had. And I would keep moving, because slowing down was how you stayed stuck. And staying stuck was not something I was willing to do. Not for a disease, not for a diagnosis, not for anything. I finished high school through an alternative program the following spring. Grandma sat in the third row with Tobias on her lap, his small body dressed in a white shirt and a clip-on tie she had found at the church sale and pressed 3 times until it was perfect. When they called my name and I walked across that stage, he started clapping before anyone else. Messy, enthusiastic, completely uncoordinated. And the sound of it, that small irregular clapping, broke something open in me that I hadn't known was still closed. My parents didn't come. I had not invited them. But I had imagined, in the private way you imagine things you know are foolish, that they might show up anyway. That whatever had happened on that porch might have softened over 8 months into something resembling regret. It hadn't. I looked out at the crowd, found Grandma's face, and let that be enough. It was enough. It was more than enough. She was rocking slightly in her seat the way she always did when she was moved. That slow, unconscious rhythm. The same rhythm as her porch chair on summer evenings, steady as a heartbeat. Tobias had fallen asleep against her shoulder by the time I returned to my seat, his cheek pressed to the fabric of her good dress, her hand curved around his back like a parenthesis. I filed that image away. I file everything away. Always have. The things that matter, the things that might matter later, the things that don't seem to matter yet, but carry a particular weight I've learned to trust. I filed away the developer who came back twice more that year. Different suit, same brochure, and the particular way Grandma's eyes went to the road sometimes in the late afternoons, scanning the gravel like she was waiting for something she wasn't sure she wanted to arrive. I filed away the way she looked when she wasn't looking at me. Community college suited me in ways I hadn't expected. Not the classes themselves, though I was good at them, disturbingly good. The kind of good that made professors ask questions after class with a particular expression that meant they were recalibrating something. It was the library, the specific silence of it, the feeling of walking into a room where every question anyone had ever asked had been written down somewhere and was waiting. I read law cases the way other people read novels, not because I had decided anything yet, because they were stories. Because they were full of people whose entire lives turned on a single moment, a single document, a single decision made by someone with the power to name what was true and what wasn't. That power interested me. I was 3 semesters in when the bank incident happened. Grandma needed a small loan. Roof repairs, the kind that couldn't wait another winter. We drove together to Ridgemont Savings and Trust, the only bank within 30 miles. The bank where she had kept her accounts for 40 years without a single missed payment, without a single overdraft, without a single reason for anyone to look at her record and see anything other than a woman who kept her word. The loan officer was young. Cheap suit. The particular confidence of someone who has been given a small amount of power and has not yet learned the difference between authority and arrogance. He didn't look at her paperwork properly. I watched his eyes move across it without landing. Ma'am, income from a vegetable stand isn't sufficient collateral. We can't help you. Grandma's hands were folded on the desk. Her voice was quiet and even. I've been a customer here for 40 years. I've never missed a payment on anything. He smiled the way people smile when they've already decided and are just waiting for the conversation to end. Policy is policy. I felt something ignite in my chest. Not surprise. Surprise would have meant I hadn't been paying attention. What I felt was the specific heat of watching something wrong happen in slow motion. Watching a person be dismissed not because of anything in her record or her character or her word, but because of the table she sold tomatoes from and the color of her skin and the fact that the man across the desk had decided in the first 3 seconds that she wasn't worth his full attention. We left empty-handed. Grandma said nothing on the drive home. She looked out the passenger window at the flat Georgia landscape moving past and said nothing, and her silence was its own kind of statement. The silence of a woman who has been dismissed so many times she has stopped being surprised by it and started simply cataloging it. Another entry in a long and exhausting record. She patched the roof herself that weekend with plastic sheeting and a prayer. I sat in the library that night and read everything I could find about predatory lending practices, discriminatory loan denial, consumer protection law. I kept track of what mattered. I always kept track of what mattered. The second incident came a month later. A contractor appeared at Grandma's door with an urgent story about foundation instability. Dangerous, he said. Emergency repairs needed immediately. $8,000 up front. He could start Monday if she signed today. I was home. I stood in the doorway behind Grandma and listened to his pitch and felt the wrongness of it the way you feel a change in weather. Not yet visible, but present, unmistakable, already moving toward you. Sir, I said, stepping forward, we're not signing anything today. He looked at me the way men like that look at young women who speak when they haven't been invited to. Little girl, this is grown folks' business. Something went very still inside me. This grown folk, I said quietly, knows a predatory contractor when she hears one. You'll provide written documentation of the alleged damage, your license number, and 3 references before we have any further conversation. If you return without those things, I'll call the sheriff. He laughed. He left. He did not come back. That night, Grandma looked at me across the dinner table with something new in her eyes. Where did that come from? She asked. I don't know, I said. It just came out. She nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was thinking something she wasn't ready to say yet. You ever think about law, baby? The word landed in my chest and stayed. Law. I turned it over that night in the guest room while Tobias slept. The way it felt in my mouth. The weight of it. I thought about the loan officer's eyes moving across Grandma's paperwork without landing. I thought about the contractor's laugh. I thought about a courtroom I had never been inside and a robe I had never worn and the specific fantasy, half-formed, almost embarrassing in its audacity, of being the person in the room who got to say what was true. One day, I thought, I want to be the one sitting in that chair. Then I put it away, because I had 2 jobs and a toddler and a disease quietly eating at my joints, and fantasies were a luxury I couldn't afford yet. But I didn't throw it away. I filed it. 3 years later, I transferred to Georgia State on a partial scholarship. Tobias was 5, starting kindergarten, already the kind of child who noticed everything and said less than he observed. Grandma's eyes in a smaller face, her particular quality of watchful stillness. He adapted to the new routine with a seriousness that made me simultaneously proud and heartbroken. 5 years old, already understanding that his mother's absence during certain hours was the price of something important. Grandma watched him while I attended classes. Every morning, I dressed carefully. Not for vanity. I didn't have time for vanity, but because I understood intuitively that presentation was a form of argument. That walking into certain rooms looking like you belonged there was half the battle of convincing the room you did. That a black woman in Georgia navigating spaces not built for her needed every advantage she could construct, including the ones that lived in the set of her shoulders and the quality of her eye contact. The lupus flared unpredictably. Some weeks I felt almost normal. Other weeks I climbed stairs like an old woman, my joints hot and swollen, my hands unreliable. I hid it with the particular skill of someone who has practiced hiding things. From professors, from classmates, from everyone except Grandma, who noticed everything and said nothing until I was ready to hear it. Baby, you're hurting today. I'm fine. Don't lie to me. I changed your diapers. I'm fine, Grandma. She would look at me for a long moment. Then she would bring me a warm compress and a cup of tea and sit in her rocking chair at the edge of the room, the slow creak of it filling the silence, and not say another word about it. The smell of sweet potato pie drifting from her kitchen on Sunday mornings became the smell of survival to me. of something worth fighting toward, of a life that was being built even when it didn't feel like it, even when it felt like it was falling apart. Because here is what I know now that I didn't know then. Falling apart and falling forward can look identical from the inside. I graduated summa cum laude. I was accepted to one of the best law schools in the South. And the night I got the letter, the night I sat at Grandma's kitchen table reading my own name on that acceptance with a feeling I still don't have adequate language for, she looked across at me with those eyes that held secrets I was only beginning to understand. I always knew, she said simply. She looked toward the window. The road beyond it was dark and empty. Something moved through her expression, there and gone, quick as weather. Then she looked back at me and smiled. But for just a moment, just one, I had seen it. She was waiting for someone who hadn't come. 7 years ago, I made a quiet decision that nobody knew about. Not even the people closest to me. I planted something, and I walked away, and I waited to see what would grow. If you've ever done something like that, built something in silence, without applause, without anyone watching, you already understand this story in your bones. Subscribe, because what I planted is about to bloom in the middle of a courtroom, and you need to be there when it does. Law school nearly broke me in the way that only things worth having can break you, not the coursework. The coursework I could handle. I was built for it, wired for the particular pleasure of an argument that had to be airtight, a case that had to hold its own weight under pressure. What nearly broke me was everything surrounding it. The cost of it, the logistics of it, the specific exhaustion of being a black woman in rooms that had been designed, architecturally and culturally, for someone else entirely. That I worked nights at a hotel downtown. Front desk. 12-hour shifts on weekends, shorter shifts during the week, enough to cover books and the gap between my scholarship and my rent. Tobias was 6, then 7, then 8, growing fast, noticing everything, asking questions I answered as honestly as I could and deflected when honesty would have frightened him. Why do you come home so tired, Mom? Because I'm building something, baby. What are you building? Us. I'm building us. He would nod with that serious grandma face of his and go back to whatever he was doing, apparently satisfied, and I would stand in the hallway for a moment with my hand pressed to the wall and my eyes closed and count 1, 2, 3. The lupus came and went like whether I had learned to read but couldn't control. I managed it, medication, sleep when I could get it, the particular discipline of a woman who knows her body is a building with structural damage and treats it accordingly. Some weeks it retreated far enough that I almost forgot it was there. Other weeks it reminded me with a thoroughness that was almost personal, almost intentional, like something with a grudge. I never missed a shift. I never missed a class. Then came Mrs. Patterson. She was my supervisor at the hotel, mid-50s, cordial in the way of people who perform warmth without generating it. We had worked together for 8 months without incident. I had not missed a single shift. I had not been late once. My performance reviews were immaculate. That I requested accommodation for a medical appointment. Routine. A form. A single afternoon. She called me into her office 3 days later. Naomi, she said, folding her hands on her desk with the careful deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this. I've been reviewing your file. Okay, I see you have a condition. Lupus, I said. Yes, it doesn't affect my work. I've observed some fatigue, some inconsistency. I haven't missed a shift in 8 months. Her smile was tight and brief, the smile of someone waiting for you to finish speaking. We need employees who can commit fully, who won't become unreliable. She paused. I'm letting you go. The room went very quiet. You're firing me because I'm sick. I'm letting you go because this isn't the right fit. I sat across from her and felt the specific cold of it. Not surprise, not even anger yet, just the cold clarity of watching someone do something wrong and knowing, with absolute certainty, that they believed they were completely safe doing it. That I cleaned out my locker. That I drove home. That I sat at Grandma's kitchen table and told her I'd lost the job. Then I told her I was quitting law school. The words came out flat and final. The way my mother's words had come out on that October night 20 years before, and some part of me recognized the echo of it and hated myself for it. I can't do it, I said. I can't work and study and raise Tobias and fight my own body. Something has to give, and it can't be him. Grandma was in her rocking chair. The slow creak of it was the only sound in the room for a long moment. Then it stopped. You didn't crawl out of that house at 16 to stop now. I looked up. Her eyes were steady. No performance in them. No comfort offered as substitute for truth. Those people who fired you, they don't get the last word. Your parents who put you on that porch, they don't get the last word. This disease eating at your body, it doesn't get the last word. Her voice dropped. You finish what was started in you, Naomi. You hear me? Because I didn't save every dollar from that vegetable stand and patch my own roof with plastic sheeting so you could stop at the hardest part. I went very still. What did you say? She looked at me for a moment. Something moved through her expression, the same look I had seen through the window, the one directed at the empty road. There and gone. I said you finish what was started in you. She didn't explain the rest. Not that night that I enrolled in my second semester, the next morning that I graduated law school at 28. Passed the bar first try. Took a position as a public defender in Clayton County. The only position available to a woman with no connections and no pedigree, and a resume that began with a GED program and a community college and smelled, to certain people, like effort rather than legacy. The pay was brutal. The caseload was crushing. Most of my clients were people the system had been designed to process rather than protect, black and brown and poor and exhausted, and already halfway convinced that the outcome was predetermined, but I was not convinced that I tried every case like it was the only one. Then came the afternoon that I still returned to, that I have returned to, in the quiet of my chambers, more times than I can count. That I was defending a 17-year-old boy. I'll call him Terrell, because his real name belongs to him and not to this story, accused of stealing a car. Circumstantial evidence only. Found near the vehicle. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No confession. The kind of case that should have been dismissed before it reached a courtroom. The judge that day was an older man who had been on the bench for 23 years and wore his tenure like a crown. Every objection I raised he overruled with the theatrical impatience of a man who has decided the outcome and finds the proceedings an inconvenience. Every piece of evidence I challenged he allowed with a wave of his hand. Then, during my closing argument, he cut me off. Counselor. His voice was loud and slow, the voice of a man performing patience for an audience. Perhaps you're in over your head. This courtroom isn't a place for affirmative action experiments. The room went silent. I felt the words land, not just on me, on every black person in that courtroom. On Terrell, sitting at the defense table and assured his mother had pressed, watching justice demonstrate, in real time, exactly what it thought of him. I wanted to detonate. I swallowed it. Your Honor, I said, my voice level. May I continue? He waved his hand. Terrell was convicted. I watched them lead him out and felt something harden inside me. Not break, not collapse, but harden. The way certain materials become stronger under extreme pressure rather than weaker. I drove to Grandma's house. Maybe they're right, I told her. Maybe I don't belong in those rooms. She looked at me with the specific directness of someone who has no patience left for that particular lie. Those people don't get to tell you where you belong. She leaned forward. One day you'll be the one sitting in that chair. Then you decide who belongs. I drove home in the dark, and I started keeping a different kind of track, not just of cases, not just of outcomes. Of people. Of a particular young attorney I had encountered once at a continuing legal education seminar. Sharp, hungry, from rural Georgia, the kind of brilliant that doesn't know yet what it is. The kind that needs one door opened at exactly the right moment. His name was Richard Hall. I filed it away. The years that followed built me in layers. I moved from public defender to assistant district attorney. I tried cases that made headlines. I made decisions about charges, about mercy, about which cases went to trial, and which one's got a different kind of resolution that I carried carefully. The way you carry things that belong to other people's lives. I built a reputation, and quietly, without announcement, I established a scholarship fund for promising law students from disadvantaged backgrounds, rural Georgia specifically. The first recipient was a young man who reminded me, in his application essay, of the girl I had been. Hungry and precise and furious in the particular way of people who have been told what they cannot do for so long that the fury has become fuel. His name was Richard Hall. I funded his education. I watched his career from a careful distance, and I waited. Then my grandmother got sick. Heart failure, the doctors said. A body that had carried so much for so long, finally asking to be put down. I was at her bedside every free moment. Tobias came too. 17 now, quiet and serious and present in the specific way of young people who understand that certain moments require their full weight. One evening, she grabbed my wrist with a strength that surprised me. "Baby," she whispered, "that land out back. I sold it. Years ago." I stared at her. "What?" "When? After you started law school. The developer came back. I took the offer." "Grandma, why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't for spending." Her eyes held mine. "It was for saving. For you. For Tobias. For the life I knew you'd build." She looked toward the window. "When the time comes," she said quietly, "you'll know what to do." She died 3 days later, her hand in mine, the rocking chair still. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly. Has someone ever believed in you so completely, so quietly, so without asking for anything back, that you didn't understand the full weight of it until they were gone?" Grandma saved $2.1 million on a vegetable stand income while patching her own roof with plastic. She never told me. She just believed. If this story is landing somewhere real for you right now, somewhere that hurts in the way only true things hurt, subscribe. Not for me. For everyone who had a Josephine and lost her. For everyone who never did and needed one. This channel exists because of women like her. Stay. The attorney's office smelled like old paper and furniture polish, and the particular quiet of rooms that have absorbed too many difficult conversations to hold any particular one anymore. Bellamy was Grandma's attorney. 70-something. Slow-moving, careful-spoken. The kind of man who had watched enough human nature pass through his office to be surprised by very little of it. He had known Josephine for 30 years. When he looked at me across his desk after the funeral, his eyes held the specific gentleness of someone delivering news they know will land in multiple directions at once. "Your grandmother named you sole beneficiary," he said. I expected that. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "She didn't have much, but whatever she had, Ms. Booker." He stopped me. "She had quite a bit." He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it. The first page was a property sale document. The land behind Grandma's house. The 15 wooded acres the developer had come back for 3 times over 20 years. Had sold for $1.20 million. I stared at the number. "She invested every dollar," Mr. Bellamy said quietly. "She never touched it. 15 years of growth." He turned to the next page. Total value, $2.10 million. That the folder slipped from my hands. I picked it up, set it back on the desk, pressed both palms flat against the surface like I needed something solid to confirm the room was still real. "She lived on coupons," I said. My voice sounded far away. "She patched her own roof with plastic sheeting." "Yes." "She told me she didn't have money for." I stopped. Thought about every time she had said she was fine. Every time I had believed her. Every time I had accepted her sacrifice as the natural condition of her life rather than a choice she was making deliberately for me. "She lied to me." "She protected you," he said gently. "There's a letter." He handed me an envelope. Her handwriting on the front, shaky, deliberate, the handwriting of someone who knew this letter mattered and took their time with it. I didn't open it there. I thanked him. Walked to my car. Sat in the parking lot with the envelope in my lap and the Georgia sun coming through the windshield. and the specific silence of a world that had just removed something irreplaceable from it. The bird landed on the curb 3 feet from my car, tilted its head at me with the absolute indifference of a living thing that had no idea what had just happened in that office. I laughed. Once, short and broken. Then I opened the letter. Her handwriting filled 2 pages. Slow and careful, every word placed like it had been thought about first. Baby, if you're reading this, I'm home with the Lord and you've become the woman I always knew you'd be. This money isn't charity. It's what you're owed. They threw you away like you were nothing. So I took back what I'd once planned to give them. They can have what they gave you. Nothing. All my love, forever. Grandma. I read it 3 times. Then I sat with it. I took back what I'd once planned to give them. She had originally intended the land for my father. His inheritance. His portion. She had changed it. Quietly, completely, without a single word to anyone. The moment he put me on that porch, she had spent 20 years punishing him in silence. 20 years. She had smiled at church functions and baked sweet potato pies and run her vegetable stand and rocked in that chair on summer evenings and carried this verdict inside her the entire time, patient and absolute, and never once told me. The bird on the curb flew away. I pressed my fingers to my wrist. 1, 2, 3. Grandma, still teaching me, still counting with me. Even now. 1 week after the reading of the will, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. A Georgia area code. I almost didn't answer. Naomi. A voice I hadn't heard in 20 years. It's your father. The sound of it, the specific timbre of it, the military flatness, the way he said my name like he was filing a report, did something to my chest that I hadn't prepared for. Not warmth. Not anger exactly. Something older and more complicated than either. The specific ache of a wound that healed crooked. We heard about Margaret's passing, he said. We're sorry for your loss. No, you're not. Silence. We'd like to talk. About the estate. There it was. Not. How are you? Not. I've thought about you every day. Not. I drove to your grandmother's house 5 years after I put you on that porch and sat outside for an hour working up the courage to knock, and then drove home without doing it because I was a coward and I have never forgiven myself. Not any of that. Just, we'd like to talk about the estate. I hung up. The certified letter arrived 2 days later. Legal letterhead. A law firm I recognized. One of the most prestigious in Atlanta. The kind that charged rates designed to intimidate before a single argument was made. Petition for distribution of estate assets that my parents were suing me. Undue influence, they claimed. Diminished mental capacity. Their position, that I had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman into cutting them out of an inheritance that had rightfully been theirs. They were demanding $2.10 million every dollar. I sat at my kitchen table and read the document 3 times. Then I set it down and looked at the wall and understood, in a way that was almost clarifying in its cleanness, what I was dealing with. They had not called when I graduated high school. They had not called when I passed the bar. They had not called when I was appointed to the bench, the youngest judge in the district, the only black woman, a headline that had run in 3 Georgia newspapers. They called when there was money. They had always been consistent. I would give them that. I called Patricia Vaughn, the best litigator I knew, a woman who approached a courtroom the way a surgeon approaches an operating table, precise, unhurried, completely, without mercy. They don't have a case, she said after reviewing the documents. The will is airtight. Your grandmother was mentally competent. Everything was executed properly. That won't stop them. No, she agreed. It won't. I stared at the letter. Patricia, I said slowly, I need you to run discovery as thoroughly as you've ever run it. I need everything. Every document. Every communication. Every decision they made and when they made it. That's standard. I know. I paused. I also need you to find out who they're planning to use as lead counsel. A brief silence. You expecting someone specific? I'm expecting them to go to the most expensive, most prestigious firm they can afford. Old Atlanta money always does. I looked at the wall. When you find out who they've retained, tell me immediately. Any reason? I thought about a young man at a continuing legal education seminar 11 years ago. Sharp and hungry and from rural Georgia. The kind of brilliant that had needed one door opened at exactly the right moment. The door I had opened. Just tell me. I said that I hung up and sat in the silence of my kitchen for a long time. Tobias was at college now. The house was quiet in the specific way of houses that have held children and are now learning a different kind of life. His school photographs lined the hallway wall. Every year from kindergarten to senior portrait. A record of becoming that I had documented with the same careful attention I gave everything that mattered that I walked down that hallway. Stopped at his kindergarten photograph. 5 years old. Clip-on tie. Serious eyes. Already so much himself that I thought about grandma that I thought about the rocking chair. Still, now, for the first time in my memory that I thought about 20 years of a woman living on coupons and plastic sheeting and vegetable stand dollars so that I could stand on something solid. And I thought about my parents. Sitting somewhere tonight, confident, certain, convinced that the law would give them what they believed they deserved. They had always underestimated me. Every single person who had ever dismissed me, fired me, talked over me, laughed at me, convicted my clients without evidence, called me an affirmative action experiment. Every single one of them had made the same foundational error. They thought surviving was all I was doing. They had no idea I was building. Patricia called back 4 days later. They've retained Richard Hall, she said. He made partner at Caldwell and Associates last year. They're paying him $400 an hour. I set down my coffee cup, very carefully. Thank you, Patricia. I hung up, walked to my home office, opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, in a manila folder I had kept for 7 years, was a copy of a scholarship application. Rural Georgia, first generation, brilliant, hungry, furious in the particular way of people who had been told what they couldn't do for so long the fury had become fuel. His photograph was paper-clipped to the front, Richard Hall. 22 years old in the photo. Not yet the man my parents had just paid $400 an hour to destroy me. The man I had made that I closed the drawer, sat in my chair, and for the first time since my grandmother died, I felt something other than grief, something quiet. Something patient, something that had been waiting a very long time to be useful. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Not the lupus. Not anxiety exactly. Something quieter than both. The specific wakefulness of a person standing at the edge of something they have spent years building toward and suddenly, irrationally, afraid to look down. I got up at 2 in the morning and walked through my house in the dark. Tobias had driven down from college that afternoon. He was asleep in his old room, doors slightly open the way he had slept since he was small, always needing to hear the house breathing around him, always needing to know someone was there. I stood in his doorway for a moment, looked at the shape of him under the covers. 20 years old and still sleeping with one arm thrown over the edge of the bed the exact same way he had at 2, at 5, at 12. I had built this specific, breathing, ordinary, extraordinary thing. This boy who became this man. Whatever happened tomorrow, they could not take this. I walked to my home office, stood in front of the window. The street outside was empty and still, amber light from the corner lamp pooling on the wet asphalt. It had rained while I slept, the kind of quiet Georgia rain that washes everything and leaves the air smelling like beginning. I thought about Grandma, not the grandma of the last months, fragile and hospital-lit, her hands thinner than I had ever known them. The earlier one, the permanent one, flannel robe and cedar smell, and a door opening without hesitation at midnight, because some people hold themselves ready for the ones who need them most. The house was silent in the way it had been silent since Tobias left for college, a silence with texture, a silence that remembered noise. I could almost hear the rocking chair, the slow creak of it, steady as a heartbeat. Almost. I pressed my fingers to my wrist instead. 1, 2, 3. Still here. Still building. I went to my closet. At the very back, behind everything else, hung the robe. Not the one from my chambers. A spare, the one I had bought when I was first appointed, still in its dry cleaning bag, never worn. I had kept it here, at home, for reasons I hadn't fully examined. I took it out now, held it in both hands. Black, substantial. The weight of it always surprised people who had never held one. They expected ceremony and got gravity instead. I had put this on for the first time 2 years ago in my chambers, alone, and stood in front of the mirror and thought, this wasn't supposed to happen. Girls kicked out pregnant at 16 don't become judges. Girls with diseases eating them from the inside don't outlast the system. Girls abandoned by their own blood don't rise to sit in judgment. And yet, I hung the robe back carefully, smoothed the bag over it. Tomorrow I would not be wearing it. Tomorrow I would be sitting on the wrong side of a courtroom in my own building. But it would be there, down the hall, hanging in my chambers, present in its absence the way Grandma was present in hers. That was enough. Tobias found me in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup, watching the sun come up through the window. He poured himself a cup and sat across from me without speaking. He had her quality, Grandma's, of understanding that some moments don't need filling. We sat together in the early light for a while. Then he said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." He turned his cup slowly in his hands. "Will it always be like this? For people like us?" He looked up. "Will we always have to fight just to be treated like everyone else?" I looked at my son, 20 years old, already volunteering somewhere on Saturday mornings that he hadn't told me about yet. Already planting seeds in other people's lives the way Grandma had planted them in mine. I told him the truth. "Yes," I said, "we'll always have to fight, because the ones who came before us fought for us, and we fight for the ones coming after. That's not a burden, baby." I held his eyes. "That's the inheritance." He nodded slowly. Something shifted in his face, not resignation, not defeat. Something older and quieter than both. Understanding. Acceptance of a weight he was already choosing to carry. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm, just like hers. "Patricia called at 8. Something came up in discovery," she said. "Documents from your mother's side. I need you to look at something before we go in." A pause. "It's unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? I'm not sure yet." Another pause. "Just look at it with an open mind." I told her I would. I hung up and sat with the morning a moment longer. Then I pressed my fingers to my wrist one last time. 1, 2, 3. Still here. Time to go collect what was owed. 20 years. That's how long this moment took to build. If you've been here from the beginning, if you've carried Naomi through the porch and the diagnosis and the courtroom humiliation and the scholarship and the rocking chair going still, you already know this story has your whole heart. Subscribe if you haven't, because what happens in that courtroom in the next few minutes took everything she had to build, and you've earned the right to see it land. The Clayton County Courthouse smelled exactly the way it always did: floor wax, old wood, recycled air, and the particular stillness of a building that has absorbed 20 years of other people's most important days. I had walked into this building hundreds of times through the side entrance, the one with my name on the placard, the one that said without words that I belonged here, that I had earned the right to this specific door. Today I walked through the front, like everyone else. The courtroom was packed in the way that courtrooms get packed when word spreads that something worth watching is about to happen. People from Grandma's church sat in the back rows, older women in good hats, men with their hands folded, people who had known Josephine for decades and had driven an hour to be present for whatever came next. Colleagues from the DA's office. A reporter I recognized from the Clayton County Gazette. Notepad open. Pen ready. My parents were already at the plaintiff's table that I smelled my mother before I fully saw her. Expensive perfume, slightly too much of it. The smell of a woman who needed you to know she had not come down in the world. She sat with her arms folded, her silver hair neat, her jaw set with the particular rigidity of someone who has already decided how this ends. My father sat beside her. Shoe polish and starch. Military straight, though the straightness cost him more now than it used to. I could see it in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself upright. A man performing the posture of certainty, he no longer fully felt that I sat down at the defendant's table, pressed my fingers to my wrist. Point 1. 2. 3. Richard Hall entered the courtroom at 9:58. That I had not seen him in person since the seminar 11 years ago. He had been 22 then, hungry and precise and furious in the specific way of people built for something larger than their current circumstances. He was 33 now, partner at the most prestigious firm in Atlanta. Polished, assured, the kind of attorney other attorneys studied. He crossed to the plaintiff's table without looking up from his documents. My parents leaned toward him, whispering, confident. Then he looked up. His eyes swept the room the way experienced attorneys sweep rooms, cataloging, assessing, noting who was where and what it meant. They moved across the gallery, across the bench, across the defendant's table, and stopped. That I watched recognition move through his face in layers. First, the professional register. He knew my name, knew my title, had appeared in front of me once 2 years ago on a motion hearing. Then, something deeper. The specific confusion of a man whose internal geography has just shifted without warning. His eyes moved to my parents. Back to me. Back to my parents. Something clicked behind his eyes. The full geometry of it assembling itself in real time. That he set his documents on the plaintiff's table, straightened his jacket, and walked toward me. My mother frowned. My father watched. Hall stopped in front of the defendant's table. He looked at me for one long moment. Not performing, not calculating, just looking. The look of a man standing at the intersection of everything he owed and everything he had become. He bowed his head slightly. "Good morning, Judge." For words, the courtroom went very still. My mother's face drained of color. My father's mouth opened. The gallery erupted in whispers that Judge Williams silenced with a single sharp look. But the damage, the beautiful, 20 years in the making damage, was already done. They had hired the man I built. They had walked into my courthouse. They had bet everything on the wrong hand. The hearing proceeded. Hall did his job, professionally, thoroughly, as he was obligated to do. He presented my parents' arguments with the precision of a man who understood their weakness better than they did. His heart wasn't in it. Everyone could see. Patricia was surgical. She presented Grandma's medical records, 3 physicians, spanning 15 years, all documenting full cognitive function, independent decision-making, a woman of complete and consistent mental clarity until her final weeks. She presented the original will and the revised version, properly witnessed, properly executed, dated clearly, every legal requirement met without exception. Then she called her first witness, Deacon Harris, 80 years old, the oldest active deacon at Grandma's church, a man who had known Josephine for 40 years and arrived in his Sunday suit because he said some things deserved your best clothes. "Deacon Harris," Patricia said, "did Raymond Booker ever visit his mother's home in Creekwood after 2006? The old man nodded slowly. "Once, about 5 years after the situation with his daughter. He drove up from Ridgemont, parked outside, sat there for a good hour. Did he go inside? He went to the door, knocked. The courtroom was completely silent. What happened? Miss Josephine answered through the screen. He said he was sorry, said he'd made a mistake. Deacon Harris paused. She told him to come back when he'd found his daughter and begged her forgiveness first. Said until then he wasn't welcome in her house or her heart. And did he find his daughter? The old man looked at me across the courtroom. No, ma'am. He drove home. My father put his face in his hands. Patricia let the silence hold for a moment. Then she turned to her second witness. The respondent calls Mrs. Eileen Crawford. A woman I didn't recognize took the stand. 60s, careful eyes, the bearing of someone who had decided on the drive over that she was going to tell the truth and live with whatever came from it. Mrs. Crawford, did the plaintiff Lydia Booker discuss her daughter's pregnancy with you? A pause. Yes. What did she say? She said Naomi was an embarrassment, that the pregnancy would ruin their reputation. She stopped, steadied herself. She said they had to cut the infection out before it spread. My mother was on her feet. That is a lie. She is lying, Mrs. Booker. Judge Williams's voice was quiet and absolute. Sit down, or I will have you removed. My mother Saturday, her hands were shaking. Patricia picked up a document from her table. Your Honor, I'd like to present the respondent's final exhibit. This is a letter written by the decedent, Margaret Josephine Booker, found among her personal documents and properly authenticated. She looked at Judge Williams. May I read the relevant portion? He nodded. Patricia read. They threw away my grandbaby like she was nothing. So I took back what I once planned to give them. She earned a life they tried to deny her. They can have what they gave her. Nothing. The courtroom went completely still. Then Patricia said, Your Honor, I have one more item. She reached into her folder and produced a photograph. Held it up. This was found among the plaintiff Lydia Booker's personal documents during discovery. It is a school photograph of the respondent, Naomi Booker. Age 7. She reached in again. This is age 8. This is age 9. She laid them on the evidence table one by one, a row of small faces in school portrait backgrounds, year after year after year. We found photographs from every year of the respondent's school life. Every single year. Kept. Preserved. The silence in the courtroom changed quality entirely. That I looked at my mother. She was staring at the photographs. Her arms had unfolded. Her hands were in her lap. Her face held something I had never seen on it in my life. Not the cold control, not the rigid certainty. Something cracked open and old and almost unrecognizable. Something that looked, from a distance, like grief. That I thought about Patricia's call that morning. Something unexpected. Look at it with an open mind. That I looked at my mother. The woman who had said cut the infection out, and that's no longer our concern, and opened a door in October and let the cold air in. The woman who had kept every photograph. I felt the anger. I let it be what it was. Then I felt something else move underneath it. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. Not today. But the faint, complicated outline of it. The beginning of a question I would spend a long time answering. I let that be what it was too. Judge Williams delivered the ruling. The evidence overwhelmingly supports the validity of the decedent's will. Margaret Booker acted independently, with full mental capacity, and with clear intent. There is no legal basis for the petitioner's claims. He paused. Furthermore, this court finds the lawsuit was filed in bad faith. The petitioners are ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by the respondent. He looked at my parents over the top of his glasses. Case dismissed. The gavel fell. Outside on the courthouse steps the afternoon light was doing something extraordinary. The specific gold of a Georgia October that doesn't apologize for its beauty, pouring across the parking lot like it had been waiting all day for permission. My father found me before I reached my card. He looked broken. Not performing brokenness, actually broken. The military posture finally, fully surrendered. A man standing in the full cost of his choices with nowhere left to hide from them. Naomi. I waited. I could have come for you, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. Your grandmother told me to find you. And I was too proud. Too ashamed. I chose wrong. I've known it every day since. I looked at this man.my father. The man who opened a door and let October in. The man who drove to Creekwood and turned back. The man who called about an estate instead of a daughter. I know, I said. Can you ever forgive me? I thought about the girl on the porch. The woman in the courthouse. The 20 years between them and everything that had filled those years. The hard and holy of it. The grief and the grace. The rocking chair and the yellow roses not yet bought. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe someday. But not today. I held his eyes. Today I need you to leave. He nodded, wiped his face, walked away. I stood on the courthouse steps in the October light and breathed. 1, 2, 3. Not counting for survival this time. Just counting. just breathing, just here. 2 weeks after the hearing, Patricia mentioned it casually. Your son's work at the shelter is really something. I looked up from the document I was reviewing. What shelter? She paused. He didn't tell you? He hadn't. That evening I asked him. We were at the kitchen table, the same table where Grandma had delivered 5 words that saved my life. The same table where I had opened a certified letter that tried to take everything she left me. Tobias wrapped both hands around his coffee cup the way I wrap mine. A habit so inherited I don't think either of us notices anymore. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. He shrugged with the particular discomfort of someone who doesn't know how to accept being seen doing something good. It wasn't about me. It was about them. But why that? Why pregnant teenagers? He looked at me for a long moment. The serious eyes. The watchful stillness. Josephine's qualities living on in a 20-year-old face. Because somebody did it for you, he said. And Grandma always said kindness isn't kindness if it stops with you. I sat with that. The $2.1 million was not Grandma's real inheritance. This was the love she planted in me had grown into the man sitting across this table. And he was already planting seeds of his own, quietly, without announcement, without asking anyone to applaud. The way she had taught us both. The cycle of cruelty was broken. Something new had taken its root. The following Saturday, I drove to Creekwood alone. Grandma's house had been sold. I couldn't bear to keep it and couldn't bear to enter it. So I had let it go to a young family who would fill it with noise and life and new memories that had nothing to do with grief. I told myself she would have approved. I told myself she would have said some things are for saving and some things are for releasing, and you'll know the difference when the time comes. The cemetery was just down the road, shaded by old oaks whose roots had been in that Georgia ground longer than anyone could remember. I brought yellow roses. Her favorite. I knelt by her headstone and stayed there for a while without speaking. Just present, just breathing the clean October air, just feeling the specific weight of a love that doesn't end because the person does. Then I talked to her. I hope I made you proud, I said. I hope you saw what I became. I hope you know I couldn't have done any of it without you. The wind moved through the oaks above me. Somewhere nearby a bird was singing. The lupus is still there, I told her. It's not going anywhere. But neither am I. I touched her headstone. The stone was cold and solid and real. Tobias, you should see him, Grandma. He's so much like you. Kind and stubborn and already saving people who don't know yet that they needed saving. I laughed. The sound surprised me. Clean and full, nothing broken in it. I miss you every single day. But I carry you. In every second chance I give. In every person I refuse to throw away. In every door I open without asking questions first. I kissed my hand and pressed it to her name. Stood up. Tobias was leaning against my car at the cemetery gate, waiting. He had followed me without being asked. Just shown up, the way certain people show up, the way she had always shown up. He didn't say anything. He put his arm around me. I leaned into him. We stood there together for a moment. The family we had built, the family we had chosen, the family that no courtroom and no certified letter and no person who had ever decided we were nothing could touch. Then we got in the car and drove home. The plastic bag was gone. Both hands full of something chosen. The porch light was on. It had been on all along. If you made it here, all the way to this cemetery, these yellow roses, this parking lot, then you already know this story was never really about a courtroom. It was about what a girl builds when she has nothing. What love looks like when it's patient enough to wait 20 years to speak. What inheritance really means when it comes from someone who chose you on purpose. I want to ask you something before you go. Has someone ever thrown you away and then had to watch you become something they couldn't touch? Or has someone loved you so quietly, so completely, so without asking anything back, that you didn't understand the full weight of it until they were gone? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Every city, every story, every 2 a.m. thought you leave down there. I see them. And they matter. If this story reached something in you that needed reaching, share it. not for the numbers. For the girl who is 16 right now, standing on a cold porch somewhere, convinced her life is over. You could be the reason she finds this. Drop your city below. I want to know how far Josephine's love traveled. And one last thing. Someone very close to me said I would never build anything worth keeping. That I was starting too broken, too late, too alone. Every time someone subscribes, every time someone stays until the yellow roses, I think about her. And I think about Josephine, who never doubted for a single second. Subscribe if you stayed. Not for me. For the ones still on the porch. That I'll see you in the next story. Take care of your heart. Somewhere tonight, another woman is opening a letter she didn't expect. The return address is familiar. The handwriting is her grandmother's. She doesn't know it yet, but she's about to find out what she's worth.